I devoted the next couple days to lounging around and walking on the beach. I was in a lazy mood. On the second day, while I was sitting on the beach looking out to the ocean, a dark grey cloud gathered right overhead. By the size and gloominess of the cloud, I knew it would rain, and when it did, it rained hard like a summer monsoon. Big and warm drops landed all around me, making little explosions in the sand. I stood up and would have gone back home, but I was so wet I took off my shirt, my sandals, and jumped into the water instead. The drops were so huge they splashed when they hit the water. It looked more like a war zone than rain. Jesse showed up with his boys soon after the rain began falling. I was already in the water, so they took off their shirts and jumped in to join me. We swam halfway to the barrier where a resident pod of dolphins were jumping out of the water. A young female came up and nudged me, trying to play tag with me. I wasn't able to catch her, but the boys, being immortals, had no trouble keeping up. They'd tag her and she would come back to tag one of them. All the while, the rain continued to come down, splashing in the ocean. I watched the explosions all across the bay. It fell so hard at times, I couldn't see the beach or the retaining wall. We spent at least an hour swimming. The rain didn't let up for another 2 hours, creating several waterfalls on shore. It is times like that we remember forever. We hiked back to the house for lunch. Jesse and the boys had a gig at the Origins concert hall that night. The Origins concert hall was one of many floating concert halls. There were fantastic neon-lit buildings sitting on a platform, and floating in space, each enclosed with a force field that held the air within. Transportation developed a particular vehicle to land on those platforms, called concert vehicles. Each vehicle opened from the front so it could pull up and unload its passengers at the edge of the platform. Jesse asked if I would like to go. He always asks me when he and the kids are putting on a concert. He told me the boys had composed some new music and thought I would like to hear it. And just like him, he always waits until the last minute, never an advanced warning. Of course I was going, and it turned out to be an outstanding concert. I recorded the whole event with my recorder. A recorder was like a thumb drive the size of half a pencil. It can hold up to 25,000 hours of recordings. The recordings always sounded like the real thing. It combined with a small earbud which produced a field around your head and, again, sounded like you were right there. It surprised me they allowed me to have one of those little gadgets. If I plundered its technology, I would generate billions back on Earth, but it was not important. I marveled at how well the boys played their instruments. It was all new in my mind. I knew I had attended most of the concerts which included them, but it was so exciting as if I were there for the first time. They, along with other groups, made for a great night of music and singing. Thousands attended to watch the different talents play and sing. After the concert, late that night, we stopped at one of the modest restaurants in the hall. I reflected on the music, how impressed I was. We sat around for 2 hours talking. Afterward, we went our separate ways. I left for home and went to bed for the night. Before I fell asleep, I thought how much I missed the versions of them that were still back on Earth, wondering if they assumed I was dead. Then, I climbed out of bed, as I used to do, and prayed for each one. There would be no sleeping otherwise. Jack came over for coffee the next morning. We sat on the patio discussing the Immortals, Redeemed. I noticed there were only a minority I have seen. Other than my family, the council, the ambassadors from each planet, and a few hundred entrepreneurs, I couldn't think of any others I've seen since arriving in Sierra. Believing, I would have expected to see millions. Now, considering my mortality, I inquired, I know I am mortal, even in this odd situation. How does that work for me? Jack responded, well, you won't perish, Jeff, but you didn't come here in a complete state of immortality either. Again, providing you immortality might give you access to elements you're not allowed to access. Technically, you are somewhere between a skinned knee and the hospital. You're still alive back in your time, back on the Earth, and you can die here, but that would merely deliver you back to Earth. So, in that regard you are secure. Just remember the whole purpose you are here is to go back and write the story, the diary regarding what you've encountered while here, to spark help for some who have no hope. I feel like I should do more, like I should work or something along those lines. It has been a long vacation for me. I go sightseeing and that is it. Yeah, you lazy bum, get to work. Honestly, that is what you are here for, Jeff. You are being an observer. That is what you need to do to write your story. Just think of it as being a watcher and you are on one big assignment. Because, that is exactly what it is, an assignment, Jack explained. Okay, to get back on track. What about the Immortals? Again, I would have expected to see millions, I said, hoping to get back to our initial discussion and my question. Then, he replied, Immortals live in many places. They aren't subject to the same living conditions mortal men are subject to. A majority of Immortals live on the Earth, or throughout space. Most devote their time doing God's work. Immortals, who live in places like Sierra, rarely live in normal houses like the ones here, or in Edmonton. A few, like yourself, when you were an immortal, desired the little closets like the one you live in, he said with a smirk, then proceeded. Others, like Rory, don't appreciate living in a house at all. You remember Rory? Vaguely, I replied. Rory has never lived in a house since the rapture. He was homeless back on the Earth. So, I suppose he was used to it. I interjected, I like my little house on the bay. I know it's your favorite one, short pause, among the others you have, he commented. At that moment I recalled I had 35 homes in Sierra. Wow. I wasn't sure why. Then, I remember having that many homes was more convenience than anything else. Then, I recalled as a watcher, when I traveled from place to place, I needed to invest time in the different areas to gather pertinent information. I felt to be a competent consultant it would demand my presence and time interacting with local residents. That was just as good of an excuse as any to have so many homes, particularly in all the different places I liked to spend my time. I remembered there were millions of vacant homes throughout Sierra in which no one lived in. Vacant homes were accessible to anyone, including myself, who wished to stay in them for short periods of time. Often, families would stay in them while on vacation. I often used them when I needed to. Jack and my conversation produced a horde of memories. Man, my daydreams were never this elaborate. I could have regarded myself crazy. Right then, I thought of the cave. What about the cave, Jack? I just remembered it. Let's go there. He stood up and answered, okay, let's go. Right on. I said as I stood up to leave. I wasn't sure where we were going. So, Jack called for transport and provided instructions. We headed straight out the bay. A mile or two from the inlet, Jack brought the craft down to the water which produced a 50-foot wake, more of a tail following behind us. We continued across the ocean until we arrived at a wall of high cliffs. The wall climbed 400 feet right out of the ocean. We slowed down to where we could watch the ocean waves battering it. It was several miles long in either direction. We continued slowly to the left along the cliffs until we encountered an inlet. The inlet or cove in the wall was 100 feet wide. It extended inland 300 feet where both sides of the wall met one another like a V. Jack turned the craft into the cove. Once inside the cove, he swung to the left and stopped. We were staring directly at a cave. At the base of the cave, a flat stone ledge protruded out 50 feet, and 100 feet wide. From the ledge, it tapered down 60 feet, like one side of an ice cream cone. It had a railing on the top which stood 4 feet high. Jack landed on the top. It was a patio as furniture was placed next to several planters containing small trees and bushes. Each strategically placed neatly around the whole patio. The patio had 3 levels, the center was the lowest level. 1/4 of each side was 3 or 4 feet higher than the center. Steps were cut into the stone for access. Even up close, it appeared to be a cave, until we entered. It was an actual home. Furniture, lamps, appliances were there, although there was no door at the front, just an open space leading from the kitchen to the patio. It was a French door-size opening in the rock. I turned to look out toward the patio. The light from the sun was magical when it flowed over the whole of the patio. I didn't notice the moss when we arrived, but from inside it lit up various shades of green as it captured the rays from the sun. I walked back out and leaned over the railing. Both sides of the cliff were overgrown with moss. Small bushes with red and yellow flowers found places within its walls to grow. It was an unexpected sight. Jack explained the sun climbed overhead just off-center down the middle of the inlet. At mid-morning, it broke right at the spot where either side met at the back of the inlet. So, the morning was the most extraordinary time of day with its blend of light and shadow. The sun was off enough of the center to light only the one side of the cliffs, my side, and it shaded the other side most of the day until sunset when both sides were lit by the sun as it set. I looked below to see waves from the ocean were tumbling the full length of both rock walls, tossing water high into the air, right where the two walls met. Jack went inside. He came back out 5 minutes later with 2 cups of coffee. We sat at a small table to drink it. I said as I looked around, "This is such a cool place, Jack." I only had a vague memory of what it looked like, and I didn't remember ever having stayed here. Jack picked up on that, as he said, "I could tell you didn't recognize it by the way you wandered around with that expression on your face." I replied, "Well, I remember things. I did remember the cave itself." "Then," he continued, "everything here, all you have experienced in Sierra is from your daydreams. So, it was only natural you should recognize at least a few details." "The cave was never a part of my daydreams," I said. Jack took a sip of his coffee and proceeded, "I guess those memories came from somewhere else. I don't know. Although I might warn you, nothing is set in stone, no pun intended, nor will anything be the way you dreamed or recall it. The adventure you are experiencing here is only one of many possibilities. People and places you see or interact with may or may not end up here. Just remember, your purpose is to get the message out to as many people as possible, Jeff." Now, why did he have to say that? I was enjoying myself. "Jack, you are getting on my nerves, again," I said. "I realize where I am in the past. I recognize this is my future, and only possible should things go as I hoped they will." Then, I moaned, "I hate mortality. I suspect immortals don't have all the uncomfortable emotions mortals are still dealing with during the millennium." He said with a smile, "No, they don't. It is tough trying to describe the joy immortals have compared to living as a mortal, and I suspect that it is more difficult when you were once an immortal and now you are not." I responded, "I don't remember being immortal. I remember people, places and some things I did as an immortal, but nothing else." Jack had a definite peace of mind. I wanted to have that same peace of mind. When I counted all the people I wanted to live here with me, I concluded with great sadness, many won't do what is necessary to come live here, if they only knew the truth. I despised the heartache I felt. I even became impatient to return to the earth so I could grab people by the collar, ordering them to wake up. Sierra proved wonderful in every respect, regardless of these moments of stark reality, mortality. I lifted my face into the sun as if to find consolation there. My adventure was unbelievable, but heart-wrenching at the same time. I shifted my face from the sun and pleaded, "How do you describe to anyone what heaven is? How do you tell them when such wonderful words don't exist?" At that moment, Jack encouraged me, "First, you stop relying on yourself. Let God's Spirit speak through you. God has put you here for a reason. He is speaking to you through what you experience here. Is he not? Tell the story. Tell it as best you can. God will do the rest." I agreed. "Yep, you're right, he will." I turned my face back into the sun and listened to the waves crashing below. It seemed the advice Jack had given me was a relief and now a peace had overtaken me. We sat there for a while longer drinking our coffee. Now, I desired a cold drink as the late morning sun was getting too hot for coffee. I went inside to see what I could find to drink. While inside, I had a look around the cave. The kitchen was to the left of the entrance. As I continued deeper in, I noticed foot-diameter holes drilled into the ceiling all the way to the top of the cliffs. It turns out each hole was drilled into the stone 10 feet with lights inserted to make it appear like sunlight was coming through. They were not on, but the bulbs were visible. I assumed the lights were voice-controlled. So, I said lights, immediately they came on. As I walked through different rooms, the lights would come on as I entered. The cave had a kitchen, 2 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a living room, and a library. I love libraries. I grabbed a cold soda from the fridge and walked back outside. Homes like this one are usually owned by immortals, often in places you would not expect. I mentioned to Jack, I know that I have at least 35 houses, although I don't remember what most of them look like. Are they all remote like this one? He responded, you have a variety of homes, Jeff. Most of them are small compared to other immortal homes, but you are not big on houses. Then, neither are you like Rory, he said smiling. I replied, perhaps, one day I will try living like Rory, but in the meantime, I like kitchens too much to cook on the street. I could sleep there or anywhere, but I have to have my appliances. You have those needs because you think like a mortal, he said laughing, pointing out my condition. I shook my head, yes I am, as I walked back out to the railing, contemplating. Not only was I mortal, I had to go back to the reality I was living before I came to Sierra, before the tribulation, before the millennium. I needed to go back and tell my story. The story was no longer just my imagination, yet I understood it was not so much the story as it was the hope for a better life heaven would provide. The story would be the vehicle for hope. No one should miss heaven. I hoped my story would be helpful for someone, anyone. Why would I be here if it were not? My story was not yet complete. I suspected there would be many more experiences before I am sent back. I was confident of that. I looked down to the water below, spit, and tried to keep my eye on it, but it disappeared before I could see it hit the water. Once again, I tried with the same results. Jack wondered if I was getting bored, so he asked, are you ready to head back, Jeff? I replied, no, I would like to stay here and spend the night. Then, he said, I need to get back. So, if you would like to stay, please do and enjoy yourself. Jack left, while I stayed behind. I was relaxed, excited, and finished with all the deep contemplation, at least for the moment. I walked into the library to find a pencil and paper. After doing so, I returned to the patio and took a seat to write everything down. I pulled my little recorder and earbud out of my pocket so I could listen to the concert from last night. The little earbud creates a field around your head. You can walk quite a distance away from the recorder without the sound being distorted or diminished. As I sat, I took off my shirt for a tanning session. I loved feeling the sun against my skin, especially with music blaring. Later in the afternoon, after I had finished the concert again, I called for transport to take me up top of the cliffs. The cliffs were the end of an expansive desert. A mountain range filled the horizon, but only sand dunes everywhere else, except for one other mountain which was only 5 miles from where I stood. This place was positively remote. As I walked along, near the cliffs, I came across a small riverbed where the water flowed right over the edge. The river itself cut through the desert like a snake leading up to that lonely mountain. The mountain rose about 3,000 feet straight up from the sand. Clouds covered the top and I could tell rain was falling down the sides, causing it to glisten as moisture reflected the sunlight. Lower down its sides, great clouds of steam drifted away from the opposing elements of heat and coolness, then carried away in the conflicting winds they created. I could almost smell the steam as it came near before it scattered and vaporized in the hot desert right in front of me. I am sure it was a breath caused by an optical illusion. Nonetheless, it looked mysterious and out of place. The small lazy river it produced ended at a rock retaining wall where the water overflowed, falling down to the ocean below. A group of huge lizards was sunbathing on its banks. One appeared to dive over the cliff. I walked over to check it out. Right below the cliff was a ledge with an indent which made it look like a bowl. It was a deep pool catching the overflowing water before it descended downward. A dozen lizards were down in the pool. Several were standing vicariously on the outside edge. It made my knees weak to stand there and watch them. I turned and walked away from the edge. The river water was fresh, and I took a drink. The water felt and tasted refreshing, cool. While walking along its banks, I noticed a water pump on one side. I assumed the pump was where the cave got its water. As I continued to investigate, I stopped, turned and stood looking at the mountain. I noticed what looked like a forest at the base on the right side. So, I called again for transport, because the sand was too hot to walk, and flew over to see what I could see. It was a forest that nestled right up to the mountain. As I entered the forest, I went through a force field of some sort. When I got out of the craft, I could tell it was much cooler inside the field. The area appeared to be more of a park than a forest, as it displayed immaculately manicured trees, gardens, and grass with antique park benches placed everywhere. Obviously, someone lived here. I looked up to see if the force field covered the whole forest, but I could not tell once inside whether there was a force field or not. With exception of it being cooler inside, I wouldn't have known. I walked over to the base of the mountain. There was a rushing waterfall that appeared to be falling all the way from the top. It created a small lake which generated the small river leading towards the cave. Just outside the force field, steam veered off towards the cliffs. It followed the outline of the field. The clouds above the mountain looked like a mushroom cap. "Hello, Jeff," someone said behind me. I turned and said, "Hi, how are you?" It was an old man in his late 60s. He reminded me of a wizard out of a medieval story. His hair was almost white and long, as was his beard. He was thin and wore a long robe that went almost to his feet. He replied, "Wonderful, just wonderful, Jeff." "Well, I am sorry. Apparently, you know my name, but from there I'm at a loss." "Yes, of course, you're the anomaly. I know you well. And your story? I have it written in a manuscript somewhere, although it is still a work in progress. What brings you over this way, young Mr. Flake?" "I saw the forest from the cliffs and thought I would come see it for myself." "Now, who are you?" "Oh, sorry, I am Arthur William Morris. We are all were friends in the past. I am a resident historian, and this place is where I come to write." At that moment, another middle-aged fellow, who looked like he was from the 1920s, wearing a flat cap, walked up and said, "Hey, Jeff, it's been a while, how are you?" "I'm good, and you?" "I'm fine, just keeping busy." It was odd how old they looked. I couldn't keep from asking, "Why do you guys look so old?" "Jeff, this is Amos Monterey Taylor. You don't remember him either, do you?" "I am sorry. I don't remember many people, places or things these days." Art turned to Amos and said, "You know his story, we were just going over it last week." "Oh, yes. Well, you know, a story can appear much different from the real thing." "What does that mean?" I asked. "Well, it means nothing actually, I just forgot about your situation," Amos replied. I didn't question how or what they knew about me. It was clear that they knew something about what has happened. In answer to my earlier question, Art replied, "We often take on different appearances, including age, when we are mingling in the past. If we should get our picture taken and that face or personality shows up throughout time, someone will ask questions. So, we mix it up, which helps us to remain incognito." Amos just got back from 1920s Earth and hasn't adjusted himself yet. Me, I often look this way when I am writing, and I have been steady writing for the last 2 days. This is how I see myself when I write. It's a game, a personality to fit me when I am doing so. Then Amos asked, "Are you staying at the cave?" "Yeah, I was planning to spend the night and head back home tomorrow." Then Art said, "Come inside and have coffee with us. You have time for coffee, right?" "Of course." Their home in the forest was a large red brick mansion with a spacious front porch and a big mahogany, vertical plank, front door. We entered a large living room filled end to end with tables, all covered with piles of books on top. Half of them were open as if someone were reading them all at the same time. On the other side of the tables was an 8-foot by 4-foot mirror. The mirror was displaying several colors like waves of light moving from top to bottom and left to right. To the right of the mirror was a brass and silver panel with levers and knobs attached. It reminded me of something out of a Jules Verne novel. "What is that?" I asked. Art responded, "That is our transport. It is what we used to travel to different places back in time." We walked over to the contraption and Art explained how the levers set the date and time. Then, pointed out how the turning one or more knobs would determine the time they would be in a particular era. Art explained, "It is an old-fashioned gadget, but it is still an interesting piece of machinery, which makes it fascinating. You know better than anyone, or did rather, that we find it more enjoyable taking the time accomplishing lifelong tasks. You convinced all of Sierra of that in the beginning." Yes, that was something I understood, but didn't remember. Amos walked over and pushed 2 levers and turned 3 knobs and it revealed a picture in the mirror. The scene in the mirror didn't look familiar until Amos showed me it was a scene of the Church of God in Ketchikan, Alaska, where I got saved. There I was on my knees praying at the altar. I could hear familiar music in the background as Bob McMillan was singing. I was 22 years old. It was November of 1976. Fascinating, I thought. Then I said, "I remember that as if it were yesterday. I remember Bill White praying with me. That church became my home and remained so for the rest of my life. I left after 10 years, but no matter where else I attended, I could never think of any other place as my home." I turned to Amos and thanked him for showing me that. There was a pause and then Art said, "Come on, Jeff. Let's get some coffee." "Thanks, but I am no longer in the mood for coffee, but I would have some orange juice if you have it. Otherwise, I will pass, thank you." "Orange juice coming up," he responded. As we sat down, another young man joined us. He was as tall as Art, but was twice as heavy, with a military haircut. He had just come back from the 1960s. Art introduced him, "Jeff, this is Bob, Robert Lyle Harrison. He is also a historian and the last of our group." Then, Art turned to Bob, "Jeff has forgotten all about us. He doesn't even remember your birthday. What do you think of that?" "My birthday, Jeff? How could you? Are you telling me the rumors are true?" What rumors?" I responded. "The rumors that aliens abducted you, erased your memory, and dumped you off in some lonely field, out back. Is it all true?" "Hey! Where did you hear about that?" I insisted. Bob replied, "It's all written in the book. Art has been keeping track of you. You may have forgotten us, but we haven't forgotten you." I sat there wondering if that were a good or a bad thing. I knew they were teasing me and intended it to be light-hearted, but they had me at a disadvantage. We sat and talked about the forest, how the Tart loved the desert and almost beat me to the cave. He said he got the idea the day after I had finished it. He wanted to construct one below mine, but thought it was too intrusive. The cave was in the perfect spot because of the river, but after he saw the mountain, he constructed the living space including the very large park here instead. I told them that any one of them was welcome to stay there anytime they wanted. They informed me I had already told them that. I said, "I do that a lot these days." They looked at me, oddly. As we talked, curiosity was getting the best of me. Perhaps, before when I was immortal, I would have known all about what these guys were doing here, but in my current state I didn't have a clue. I couldn't resist any longer, so I asked, "What exactly do you guys do, and why do you travel back in time?" Art explained, "We travel back in time to collect things and write about history. We can't change the past, nor can we affect the future once it's past. So, we go back and bring things here to put in the museum." "Do you remember the Planet Museum?" "No, I don't," I replied. He continued, "On the Planet Museum is a collection of items from the history of Earth before the millennium. We go back in time and collect everything from toothpicks to ships." We collect things in such a manner so as not to disrupt time, precisely at the last moment before they are discarded. That is the time no one will remember them anymore, so there is no effect on Earth's past or future. If we try to remove anything before that moment, we get hot air and nothing will materialize on this side. That is because the laws of nature prevent us from absconding with items that would have naturally had an impact on said history. Let me give you an example. Bob, 3 months ago, started collecting a 1939 Lincoln Town Car. He retrieved the body of the vehicle just before it went to the junkyard, and then to the crusher. The car was in parts and many parts were scattered throughout the world. At the point the car reached the crusher, no one would miss it should we take it. So, he collected what was left of the vehicle. Then, he visited different periods in time where the rest of the parts of that car could be found and collected with no one noticing. He did that right as they were discarded. Once the car and all its parts are brought back, we restore the vehicle and place it in the auto museum. We do that with many things. We get artifacts just before they are gone forever. There are only 3 of us, and there is too much work for 3 people. So, we have an army of 250 companions to help with the work. Art stood up and said, "Follow me, Jeff." I got up, and he led me to what appeared to be a back door. Once, through the door we were standing in an elevator. Art pushed a button, and we descended. The elevator door opened to a massive underground hall. It was end-to-end tables full of different artifacts. Art explained, "This is our library of important artifacts." He led me to a table with a glass case on top. Enclosed within the case was a manuscript or document. Upon closer inspection I saw that it was the US Constitution. "Wow!" I shouted. Art responded, "Yep, that is the original final draft of the American Constitution." He tried to tell me how he retrieved it, but instead said something about marbles and an inner circle of a community of proboscis monkeys. Oh great, I thought to myself as I waited for him to finish. Then he continued in a manner I understood, "This library is just over 3 million square feet of these kinds of important artifacts." I looked around to see several companions busy handling other artifacts. "What are the companions doing?" I asked. "They are constantly organizing these things, which I find annoying because half the time I can't find what I am looking for." Then Art motioned me to follow him. "Come with me, Jeff, I'd like to show you something. You have seen this before, but since you remember nothing, including Bob's birthday. It's his birthday today. Anyway, follow me." We walked over to a hall and down the hall about 75 feet where it ended at a door. Art opened the door, and we passed through into a dark room. He reached over and flipped a light switch. The room was another big hall, only it was full of companion stations. There are 250 stations here for companions to connect into the hive. These companions are our helpers. They're fantastic at getting around in the past. Their timing is impeccable, much better than mine, Amos or Bob's. They don't have problems waiting around for an artifact to reach the point where we can retrieve it. We humans are such wusses compared to the companions, and we often get impatient taking an item before it was ready. They remain in status until we need them. Right now, there are 37 companions in the field. "That makes sense," I responded. We went back up to the kitchen where I told Bob happy birthday. He smiled and said thank you. Art explained, "We have another reason for going back, Jeff. While we are back in these time frames, I, being the writer, collect information on ordinary people and put that information in the books. That is a very sad part of what I do. Since I can't change the past or the future, I watch many of those people live unsaved lives. Some are evil, but most are just lost unsuspecting souls, who will face a very sad end. Although it is not all bad, as I often come across true believing Christians, and I get to watch them fight the good fight of faith. I am always impressed with the endurance and the bravery of such people. I have met some of them here and have become good friends with many. In case you are wondering, we avoid our own lives in the past. It would be just too heartbreaking to see our loved ones who never trusted Christ. Art's face turned down as sadness covered his face, but only for a moment. I thought it would be impossible for an immortal to feel sadness. I asked, how is it that made you sad, Art? Well, I still have emotions, and sometimes those emotions bring about sadness. I don't dwell on that sadness. It goes away as quickly as it comes and is only related to the past. I am never sad about the present or the future, he replied. That made sense. He continued, anyway, our purpose is to collect everything and every bit of information about the world before the millennium. We have almost covered the whole Planet Museum with our collections. Let me show you something you might find interesting. He said, screen, and a screen dropped behind him. Then he commanded, show me Acquisition 390904. The screen revealed a ship. I couldn't see the name until Art asked to zoom in on the hull. My mouth dropped to my chest. I rubbed my eyes and took a second look. It was the Titanic. I was dumbfounded. I took a drink of my orange juice and slobbered on my shirt. Are you serious? I shouted. Art replied, yep, that's right, Jeff. It's the Titanic. He paused, and went on, that was a piece of work collecting that with no one noticing. We had to build a complete replica to replace it, but we did it. It is not the only famous artifact we have collected, but I thought you might like that one. Again, why are you collecting these artifacts and why are you writing about the history of the world? Were you asked by Jerusalem to do this? I inquired. Art replied as he looked at both Bob and Amos, no, it's just a hobby. It is something the three of us wanted to do, and it benefits society. You won't believe the number of people who come to the museums we've built. Also, many of the artifacts are available for purchase and sit in many homes throughout the universe. I replied, I suppose that I have been to them in the past, but I don't recall and now I will have to make a point of doing so. I know that you liked the Auto Museum in particular. Let's go there, he said as he stood up. We went back outside and called for transport. We were off to the Planet Museum. Before we left, Art took me around to the backside of the mountain. He pointed out, see those three mountains off in the distance? The ones where the clouds are streaming from? I asked. Yes, those three mountains sit in such a way they cause heavy clouds to form between them, and the only outlet points directly to my mountain. That is why you see the long stream of fast-moving clouds ending at this mountain. I took notice once he said that. He continued, once the clouds reach my mountain, they lose their speed and moisture from the heat of the desert, which causes them to drop rain right at the peak of my mountain. The evaporation of those same clouds is why it is always raining on top. That was a science lesson, quite an interesting one all the same. We left commerce and entered the atmosphere of the Planet Museum just above a high building. Art landed the craft on its roof. On the edges of the roof were dozens of large freight elevators. We entered one and Art pushed a button to take us down to a lower floor. The elevator stopped, and we got out. Right in front of us was that 1939 Lincoln. Several specials were working on it, restoring it. Behind the vehicle was a busy machine shop where they restored the parts for the different cars they collected. To the left of us was another one of those transport contraptions, only it covered the whole wall. I turned to Art and said, that is much bigger than the one at your home. Is that for bigger artifacts? Yes, we use this one and others like it to bring back artifacts as big as locomotives. There are even bigger ones that we use to bring much larger items back, such as a ship like the Titanic, he replied. Next, we took the elevator down to a lower floor. Once there, Art said, this is your favorite floor, Jeff. Do you remember anything? No, and that frustrates me, I answered. Once the door to the elevator opened, I saw 1950 and 60 cars as far as my eyes would allow. I said nothing, I just looked around. Each vehicle was displayed in showroom fashion, some in beach settings, and others in street settings. There were as many settings as there were cars. Art asked, do you want to drive one? I said, yes. He called for one of the AI on the floor and told him to put the 1953 Corvette on the elevator. He put it on, and we got on and rode down to the first floor. Once there, the elevator opened to a road leading away from the building. The grounds surrounding the building were covered with miles of track. I drove the Corvette for 2 hours. It wasn't too fast, but I enjoyed every moment. I was pleased to meet the historians. I hoped to spend more time with them in the future. But, after 2 hours driving, I got hungry, and wanted to return to the cave. I said so to Art, and we said our goodbyes, and then I left. For some time afterward, I found it hard to take my mind off of the things I had just learned and seen. Once back at the cave, I walked over to the sink in the kitchen and turned the water on to make sure I had water. I did, and it was just as cool as I expected. Since I was hungry, I contacted a pizza parlor to have a Canadian bacon and pineapple pizza, with a Dad's root beer, delivered. I had a craving. An hour later a small transport vehicle flew up to the patio. It looked more like a van. The sides had sizable decals with the name of the pizza restaurant on its sides. No spoilers here. I don't want to expose insider information regarding the survivors of the coming pizza wars. Let's say they have always been one of my favorite take-and-bake pizza shops. Early evening was remarkable as the light from the setting sun lit the rock walls on both sides. I was spellbound watching the sun crawl along the rocks on the other side of the inlet while eating my pizza. Nighttime was a little scary. The lighting in the cave was sufficient to see your way around. The patio had several lamp posts, which provided ample light, but when you looked over the railing, it was pitch black. It was pitch black with the loud noise of ocean waves crashing against the rocks. One could only wonder what might crawl up the cliffs, over the railing, and into your bedroom while you are sleeping. I could imagine the ghastly figure reaching up over the railing as I stood there watching, frozen, in horror. No one would even hear the loud gut-wrenching screams, the relentless blood-curdling siren through the night. With several hair-raising monsters in mind, I turned the lamps off and stared up at the night sky. Millions of brilliant stars spread across the black sky, adding their eerie dim light to the darkness. I stood motionless as if I were waiting for the stars to touch me with their warmth, maybe impart their wisdom. God knew every one of their names. I didn't know even the name of one small star. Perhaps, no human could pronounce them. I would have yelled to one if I weren't afraid that it would give me the recipe for pancakes and sing Twinkle Little Star for an hour. I still chuckle when I think about Pete's response to my question about Jerusalem. Now, I will have to turn some music on as the old grey mare is playing in my head. It was getting a little cool, so I made myself a cup of hot tea, returned to the patio, and sat in a lounge chair so I could stare up at the night. People back on Earth are so consumed by their problems and successes. It would seem heaven holds no place for them. If people understood, none would want to miss going to heaven, none. I said to myself, God, please give me wisdom. I returned home the next day and spent the next few days hanging around the yard. I took advantage of the outbuilding at the bottom of the garden. The front of the building was all windows. With the push of a button, the glass would go from clear to a dark, almost black shade. The entrance door was right before the walkway leading through the gardens to the pool. Inside, in the back right corner, stood a rock waterfall, and the sound of the falling water encompassed the whole inside the building. The water circulated through a heat pump and filter. It was constantly warm. The atmosphere was steamy and humid inside with tropical plants distributed all around, which made it an exotic jungle-like climate. I relished standing in the warm falls absorbing the heat. I loved to go down there, turn on the recorder for music, and stand under the hot water. It surprised me to find there were still radio stations, particularly ones playing golden oldies. I spent a lot of time in the singing songs like This Magic Moment, Reelin' in the Years, and others. I thought if I should install closets so I can have clothes close by, maybe a bed. Too often, I neglected to dim the windows. Ugh. It wasn't whether someone might see me naked, but might see me dancing around singing while naked, and out of control, disturbing. I don't even want to think about it. One day, I had the gardener take out the rose gardens. They had become too uniform for my liking. The gardener pulled them up and replanted them in various places around the property. He replaced them with diverse kinds of rhododendrons, other bushes, flowers, and small trees as I instructed. I had grass pathways leading to small stone fountains placed in the middle of small lounging areas. Although I didn't perceive he, the gardener, was too thrilled with me. I had to explain to him there was a form of artistic license in planting gardens, not everything had to be uniform. He got the message as he aggressively landscaped the whole area in 2 days. When completed, it looked incredible. 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 When completed, it looked incredible.